the hidden masters who walk through shadows to become light. What if everything you were taught about light and darkness was incomplete? Only half the map of what it means to be truly awake, truly free, truly whole. What if the most powerful chosen ones weren't the ones who avoided the dark, but the ones who entered it willingly, with eyes wide open, hearts burning, and minds sharpened by pain? I'm not talking about those who flirt with shadow for aesthetic or ego. I'm talking about the real chosen ones, the ones who were dragged into the void by life itself and somehow came back with sacred fire. We rarely notice them at first, because they don't look like the light workers we're used to. They're not always soft-spoken. They don't always radiate peace. Sometimes they look intense, raw, even a little dangerous. But if you sit close enough, if you feel into their energy, you'll realize something remarkable. They carry a frequency that transforms you, not by making you feel good, but by making you feel real. These are the chosen ones who use darkness for good, and the truth about them is something the world isn't ready to admit, but desperately needs to hear. You see, we all crave light, but few of us are willing to pay the price it takes to truly embody it. Light is not just bliss, joy, or love. Light is clarity, and clarity is a sword. It cuts away everything that's false. Everything that's false, pretended. Everything that's been hidden in your subconscious for decades. And guess what? That process is brutal. It doesn't feel like singing bowls and incense. It feels like grief, like rage, leak at the door. The chosen ones who've touched darkness and not been consumed by it, they've learned how to wield that sword. Not to harm, but to heal. Not to dominate, but to free. These are the souls who talk about shadow integration not as a concept, but as a survival skill. They've had to face the part of themselves that wanted to give up, the part that wanted revenge, the part that didn't want to forgive. And they didn't run. They stayed. They listened. They learned to hold space for their own monster. And in doing so, they became something the world rarely understands, a master of duality. Most people think darkness is evil. But what if darkness is just energy without direction? What if it's raw, primal, undifferentiated power that hasn't been given purpose yet? That's what the chosen ones understand. They don't fear darkness, they respect it. They know it can destroy, but they also know it can transform. Think about nature. Volcanoes destroy, but they also create new land. Forest fires burn, but they make way for new growth. The chosen ones use their inner darkness in the same way. They let it fuel their purpose. They let it break apart everything they thought they were so they can uncover what's actually true. And that's why they're so powerful. That's why you feel different in their presence. Because they're not just repeating spiritual jargon, they've earned their light by walking through their own hell. And now they carry that fire as a torch to help others see in the dark. Have you ever looked back at your most painful moment and realized it was the moment you woke up? That's not coincidence. That's initiation. Pain is the gatekeeper of transformation. And the ones who are chosen to use darkness for good, they don't just survive pain. They extract truth from it. They turn it into medicine. Not just for themselves, but for others. But here's the catch. They can't do that if they deny their own shadow. Many spiritual people try to bypass the dark, pretend it doesn't exist, or cover it up with love and light language. But the chosen ones who use darkness for good, they go in. They explore the wound. They ask hard questions like, what part of me have I disowned? What pain am I still carrying that I've spiritualized, but not actually healed? What am I afraid people will see if I stop performing and start being real? These questions aren't comfortable, but they're liberating. Because once you face the truth, no one can use it against you. You become untouchable, not because you have no wounds, but because you own them. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with this deeply. What part of your darkness have you been afraid to explore because you thought it would make you unworthy of love or purpose? Who taught you that darkness was your enemy rather than your teacher? You see, most of us fear our darker emotions because we were punished for them. We were told that our anger made us bad, our sadness made us weak, our fear made us broken. But the chosen ones? They realized that those emotions weren't the problem. It was the repression of them that caused the suffering. So they stopped repressing. They started listening. They started asking their own pain. What are you here to show me? What do you need me to feel so I can finally become free? That's the real work. That's what it means to use darkness for good. It's not about casting spells or playing with sinister energy. It's about reclaiming every part of yourself that you were taught to exile. These chosen ones are not here to be gurus on pedestals. They're here to be mirrors. They show you what's possible when you stop running from yourself. They remind you that healing isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you were before the world made you dim your light. And ironically, it's often through the darkest moments that this return begins. The divorce, the betrayal, the breakdown, the loss. These are not signs that something's gone wrong. They're initiations. And the chosen ones who've walked through them, who've alchemized them, they become beacons for others who are still in the storm. They don't rescue anyone. They don't preach. They simply stand as proof that you can make it through, that you can use the very thing that tried to break you as the thing that builds your legacy. If you're watching this, maybe you felt it. Maybe you've always known that your pain wasn't random, that your struggles weren't just there to crush you. Maybe you've always known that there was power inside you, but it was locked behind shame, fear, or silence. This is your sign to open that door, to stop viewing your darkness as a liability and start seeing it as a library, packed with wisdom, stories, and codes that only you can translate. This world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more truth. And your truth, your real, unfiltered, messy, magnificent truth, is medicine, but only if you're willing to own it, to speak it, to live it without apology. And that's what the chosen ones are doing right now. They're rising, not as saints, but as sovereign souls who know how to dance with shadow and still choose love every single time. The alchemy of shadows, how chosen ones turn inner demons into sacred power. The alchemy of shadows begins when we stop seeing our inner demons as enemies and start recognizing them as exiled parts of our soul, screaming to be witnessed. There is no transformation without confrontation. The chosen ones who walk this path, those who use darkness for good, understand this better than anyone. They don't flinch when a wound opens. They don't cover it with affirmations. They lean in. They breathe into the burn. Because they've learned through lived experience that every emotion we suppress becomes a chain around our spirit, and every fear we face becomes a key. The weapon the world called too much becomes their tool for liberation. The very thing they were shamed for, intensity, anger, sorrow, passion, is what they now use to cut through illusion like a blade. That's alchemy. Not turning lead into gold, but turning pain into purpose, trauma into truth, self-doubt into self-initiation. Have you ever noticed how the most powerful people you've ever met aren't the ones who've had it easy. They're the ones who've fallen apart and rebuilt themselves not once, but many times. They don't speak from theory. They speak from battle-tested knowing. And the chosen ones who use darkness for good, they've been through wars no one saw. Wars with addiction, with shame, with identity, with the silence of nights that felt like lifetimes. But they didn't die there. They died to who they thought they were. And what emerged from that death wasn't a perfect version of themselves. It was a real one. This is the sacred power they carry. They don't try to be inspirational. They simply are, because their life became the message. Their scars became scripture. And when they speak, people don't just listen, they remember something buried inside themselves. Something unseen, something holy. The process of turning inner demons into power isn't glamorous. It's not a montage of meditations and breathwork with cinematic music. It's messy. It's raw. It's crying on the floor at 3 a.m., asking the universe why you had to endure so much. It's choosing to stay when your mind tells you to run. It's forgiving yourself for things you swore made you unworthy. And the chosen ones? They do this not once, but over and over again. Because they know that healing isn't linear, it's cyclical. They spiral deeper each time, not because they're broken, but because they are refining. And what they discover is that each descent brings them closer to their essence. Each shadow they integrate becomes a new layer of strength. Each demon they embrace becomes a guardian of their light. This is not metaphor, it's spiritual physics. What you own can no longer own you. What you love, even the dark parts, can no longer control you. Let me ask you something that most people are too afraid to ask themselves. What would your life look like if you stopped hiding your darkest truths and started using them as your greatest tools? What if the thing you've been running from is the very thing you were born to lead others through? The chosen ones don't just ask these questions, they live them. They've stopped pretending to be perfect. They've stopped trying to fit into spiritual molds. They know that divinity doesn't always look like peace. Sometimes it looks like holy rage. Sometimes it looks like setting boundaries so fierce they shatter generational patterns. Sometimes it looks like saying no, like walking away, like owning your power even when it scares the people around you. These are acts of light born through the furnace of shadow, and they are sacred. One of the biggest lies in the spiritual world is that darkness must be banished, that it's something to clear, cleanse, or cast out. But the chosen ones know better. They know that darkness is not a force to be feared, it's a frequency to be met with respect. It is not evil, it is potential, unconscious, raw, waiting to be shaped. And when we reject it, we become split, fragmented. We wear masks of light while hiding closets full of shame. But when we face it, when we sit with it, when we stop trying to kill parts of ourselves and instead invite them to the table, we become whole. That's how the chosen ones become powerful. Not by escaping their humanity, but by embracing it fully. They don't divide themselves into good and bad, light and dark. They become undivided. And in that union, they become unstoppable. If you are still here, listening, you probably carry some of this frequency yourself. You've probably been told you're too intense, too emotional, too wild, too raw. But what if those were signs that you were never meant to follow the crowd? What if your path was always meant to be different, not more difficult, but more sacred? The chosen ones who use darkness for good don't wait for permission. They create their own rituals. They write their own codes. They don't need to be approved by the mainstream spiritual world because they answer to something deeper. A divine intelligence that doesn't care about image, it cares about impact. And if you feel that fire stirring in you right now, it's not by accident. It's a signal, a remembering, not of who the world wants you to be, but of who you've always been beneath the noise. The path of the shadow servant, why the most powerful light comes from the deepest night. There's a certain kind of person who doesn't just survive their night, they serve from it. These are the shadow servants, the chosen ones who don't use light to escape darkness, but instead use darkness to illuminate truths the light alone cannot reach. They walk through pain not as victims, but as messengers. They've learned that not all healing comes from love and light mantras. Some healing comes from screaming into the void and realizing you're still held. Some healing comes from letting your rage roar through your chest like an ancient lion and realizing this too is sacred. And when you've learned how to stay in that space without losing yourself, you become something rare, someone who can guide others through the underworld without flinching. That's what it means to walk the path of the shadow servant. You don't just carry your own pain, you learn how to transmute it into power that liberates others. And let's be honest, this path isn't glamorous. It's not marketable. It doesn't come with viral quotes or neatly packaged teachings. It's gritty. It's lonely. It's unfiltered. You're not always the one people seek out first. In fact, you might be the one they resist, because you don't offer comfort, you offer truth. And truth is confrontational. It doesn't pat people on the back and tell them they're fine when they're drowning. It looks them in the eye and says, you're not fine, but you can rise. Shadow servants don't sugarcoat reality, they reveal it. And in a world obsessed with numbing, bypassing, and pretending, that kind of medicine tastes bitter at first. But it heals. It gets into the bones, into the blood. It doesn't just make you feel better, it makes you realer. That's the gift. There's a moment that every shadow servant remembers. A moment when they realized they weren't broken, they were being forged. Maybe it was after a breakdown, after losing everything, after a betrayal so deep it split them open. And in that moment, something ancient awakened inside them, not a desire to escape, but a desire to serve, to make meaning from the wreckage, to turn their own ashes into maps for others. That's the difference. Where most people run from pain, the shadow servant says, "Let me meet you there." And that is an act of immense spiritual courage. Because when you've walked through your own hell, you no longer fear anyone else's. You can sit in someone's grief without trying to fix it. You can witness someone's anger without shrinking. You can hold space for someone's shame and not judge them, because you've seen your own and made peace with it. Imagine what the world would look like if more people stopped trying to cleanse their darkness and instead honored it. If we stopped labeling our shadow as the enemy and started seeing it as a source of wisdom. The shadow is not evil. It's unintegrated. It's wounded. And often, it's brilliant. It holds the parts of our genius that were shut down because they scared people. It holds the fire of our truth that was too loud, too inconvenient for those who wanted us small. The chosen ones who serve the shadow know this. That's why they no longer apologize for their intensity. They no longer water themselves down. They burn brighter, not to hurt others, but to light the way for those still trapped in darkness. Their presence says, you don't have to be afraid of your own fire. You just have to learn how to hold it. But holding that fire, God, it's not easy. Because the more light you carry, the more of your shadow you must integrate. The deeper your calling, the deeper your initiations. Shadow servants aren't chosen because they're perfect. They're chosen because they're resilient. They have the capacity to feel deeply, to fall hard, to rise again and again without losing their soul. Have you ever found yourself wondering why your life has been so intense, so layered with pain and transformation? Why you've had to learn the same lesson in 10 different ways, bleed through the same wound until it became a scar you could name? Maybe it's because you're one of them. Maybe your path was never meant to be simple because your spirit is not ordinary. Maybe your soul signed up not to avoid darkness, but to redeem it. And redemption doesn't come from denial. It comes from radical embodiment. From saying, this is who I am. This is what I've been through. And I'm still here. Shadow servants don't wait until they're healed enough to serve. They serve from within the process. They serve from within the mess, from the edge. They remind us that the wound is not the opposite of the gift, it's the doorway to it. And that's the paradox they live. They hold grief and gratitude in the same breath, rage and reverence in the same body. They cry and laugh in the same sentence. They don't try to be spiritual by rejecting their humanity. They become divine by embracing it, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. So if you've ever felt like your pain disqualified you from being a guide, a healer, a leader, let this be your reminder. It's exactly what qualifies you. You don't need to be spotless to be sacred. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. You just need to be real. The world doesn't need more flawless teachers. It needs embodied ones. People who know the terrain of darkness and have learned how to walk it with grace. People who can say, I've been through it, and I'm still choosing love. That's the highest kind of light, the one forged in the deepest night. There comes a moment in the journey of every chosen one, especially those who've learned to use darkness for good, where the final initiation is not about surviving or healing. It's about leading, and not just leading others, but leading yourself through a world that will constantly try to pull you back into fragmentation. This is where the temptations become more subtle. You're no longer struggling with the obvious shadows. You've made peace with your rage, your grief, your edge. Now, you're facing the spiritual ego, the desire to be seen as evolved, the temptation to use your power for validation rather than service, the false comfort of becoming a persona instead of staying a presence. This is where many fall off, not because they're bad, but because the final trap is comfort disguised as purpose. The world begins to reward you for your light, and if you're not vigilant, you can start curating your truth instead of living it. But the real chosen ones, the ones who've walked through fire without becoming it, they know better. They remember that their power came from authenticity, not performance, and so they choose again and again and again. Truth over image, presence over perfection, soul over spectacle. To lead without losing your soul is to stay radically honest, even when it costs you followers, attention, or money. It's to remember that your darkness is not something to hide now that you're on stage. It's something to honor even more deeply. It's to return to the same inner altars where you once knelt in silence, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because you know that if you don't stay rooted, you'll start to float. And floating feels good until you realize you've drifted too far from what made you real. The final initiation of the shadow servant is to lead with integrity in a world addicted to illusion. To speak truth that costs you something. To walk with humility even when you're praised. To say I don't know even when people expect answers. And to keep choosing service over status, depth over hype, alignment over applause. This is where your legacy is forged. not in how many people follow you, but in how deeply you followed your own soul. The world doesn't need more spiritual celebrities. It needs sacred leaders who've stared into the void and come back with their hearts still open. If that's you, then know this: your presence is a revolution. And you don't have to do anything extra to prove it. You just have to be who you truly are. Fully, fiercely, without shame.